Welcome to Talking Event Driven, the podcast about the world of event-driven architecture. You will hear seasoned professionals sharing invaluable insights about their challenges and experiences in event-driven architecture.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast Talking Event Driven. Today with me I have Gustavo Estrada from the other side of the world. I think you're based in the US, right, Gustavo?
Correct. I'm based out
All
of
right.
Texas, the
Okay, so
good state of Texas.
founder and CEO of Onibex, but please do introduce yourself.
All right. So Gustavo Estrada. I started Onibex about, this is going to be actually our 10th anniversary in Onibex. So I came from an
Congrats.
SAP background. I started, with this SAP development in 2003. So it's been a little bit over 20 years. And we started Onibex with the idea of democratizing SAP data without, even thinking about, at that time, event-driven was not a thing. So we crossed paths with event-driven during that journey.
Okay, interesting. So your first contact with event-driven was like a specific project, or how did that end up?
Yeah, so with the, we had this idea of making integrations with SAP easier, and we started creating an e-commerce. So we have an e-commerce, actually, that's the first product that we created, a prepackaged e-commerce integrated to SAP, and we ran into the problem that the e-commerce needed to have a way to persist data in between the e-commerce and SAP, because SAP was sending data extremely fast, and we needed to process that data on the other side. So, what we first thought was to integrate the RabbitMQ, which back in that day was, pretty much the best tool to decouple integrations. It didn't work out pretty much. So we shifted to Kafka. That was around 2018, I will say 17 probably. And still, for us, the word of event-driven was not in our mindset. It was more of that we saw that the problem of integrations with the this type of systems requires something in the middle to democratize information, and that's how we end up after a while. I think it was in 2018 or 19 when we got into these event-driven architectures and those kind of things.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So, but you mentioned you already are working with the Onibex. You founded the Onibex 10 years ago. So let's say going back to 2015. What did you do before that then with Onibex?
No, before Onibex, basically I was the director of a technology in an SAP consulting firm. Okay. So we were implementing SAP, doing upgrades, those kind of things. And because we were implementing SAP, like crazy, we actually won the recognition from SAP Americas of the company that had more net new logos in 2014. Basically, with every new implementation, you had to do, these integrations with the CRMs, with e-commerce, with, it was on a daily basis, and that was a nightmare. Every time that we had to integrate SAP with something else, it was like, oh no, this is gonna be one of those implementations. So that's why, after that company got acquired, I said, you know what, we need to resolve this nightmare. It's just too much to to continue with this type of model. There has to be a better way.
Okay, all right, good. All right, so Onibex, if I understand correctly, I'm not a technical guy, but I know the value proposition of Onibex at the moment, or Onibex One Connect, is actually to be able to connect to Confluent, Kafka, and then transport that data from Confluent to SAP and back, actually. Am I correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
That's the high level. Probably it was a little bit more. Why event-driven? Why is real, let's say, what's the value for you behind an event-driven approach on that?
Well, for me, there are two different aspects to data democratization. One of them is event-driven, right? with event-driven, you need to have certain characteristics to say that you have an event-driven architecture. One of them is, of course, send data based on the event. That sometimes, might be CDC, like that is when we approach a company and we say, what, we have an event-driven, solution, they think that we're connecting to the database, and that is not, the case. We're going to the application layer. But basically, that is one of the components. You need to get the event, the data out of the system based on an event. And the second one is that you need to, have this paradigm of producers and subscribers. So with event-driven, you can send the event, but then what are you going to do with that data? If you send that data in a synchronous way, it's still event-driven, but it's not event-driven architecture. With an event-driven architecture, you're supposed to have that data somewhere where then multiple systems can subscribe to that data and do with that data pretty much whatever they want. So the producer system is just going to say, okay, listen, I'm going to set the data to a central repository, and then from there, whoever wants to grab it, I don't really care. So you can, pretty much, again, send the data based on an event, and then have another API consuming that data and doing, with a middleware, doing some transformations and getting the data to the other end, which is still, again, event-driven, but it's not event-driven architecture. So we have seen that there is a confusion, right? When to use an API driven integration, and when to use more of an event-driven architecture, and what is the difference of those two things. So you need to have a persistent layer in the middle to have these to have your data truly democratized. Why? Because you want to fire once to this, for instance, Kafka, to put a brand on it, because there are multiple ways to resolve that challenge. And then Kafka can have, different layers. Because at the end, let's say that you're integrating an ERP with a CRM. Your ERP is going to have a data model, and your CRM is going to have a different data model. Even though you have the same entities, let's say, for instance, a customer, the customer structure on the SAP side, for instance, is going to look very different than the customer structure on the Salesforce side. Those are not compatible. So you need to do some transformations in the middle. And basically, the way that last year we were referring to those transformations as silver, bronze, bronze, silver, and gold, but it's not accurate, because that represents more of a analytics approach. That medallion architecture was created by Databricks, and it refers to something totally different, right? So we are proposing something that we're calling the data core. So with data core, we have the raw data coming from events. Then we have in the middle the foundational data assets. Those foundational data assets can have different names. Like if you are in the analytic space, those foundational data assets are going to be your silver layer, right? I mean, you're going to see that as your silver layer that like in the medallion architecture. But then you can also refer that as your canonical data models. Because if you are in the integration space, and that's where, data engineering, we're talking now of a role that is called those data engineers, right?
Transformers.
Exactly. So data engineers are building pipes that can, at the end of the day, give that data to the analytics space, but also to other integrations. So we cannot refer just as a silver layer, because that serves to the analytics space, to those data scientists. But also we need to refer to canonical data models, for instance, that are in that same foundational data assets layer. Then we need another layer. Those foundational data assets are going to be the foundational data elements Let's say, for instance, what are you defining as a company? How do you define a customer? How do you define a material? And a material can be, a finished product. It can be a raw material. So how do you define that data entity itself?
Exactly. The data products.
And then we have the other layer that is the logical data assets, where you can have those data products now, because a data product, it's a product that you want to consume. So it's going to have some logic. That is the third layer that is going to be fed from the foundational data assets that are going to, have that capability of reusability. Basically, you want to have those foundational data assets as your atomic data assets, the ones that are going to create the whole thing. So if you have, after the foundational data assets, you're going to have your logical data assets. And the logical data assets are going to be, for instance, data products. And we can also have the interface contracts. So for instance, if you want to have an integration between SAP and Salesforce, and you are referring, to a single canonical that is part of your foundational data assets, then you can, have your interface contract with SAP that is going to be probably an API, an IDOC, or whatever, SAP, has for integrations. And on the other end as well, pretty much, with Salesforce, you're going to have to transform to comply with that specific API. And then you can have your three layers: your raw data, your foundational or atomic data assets, and your logical data assets, to then, basically fit not just, operational systems like SAP and Salesforce, but then from there, you can basically send the data to Snowflake, Databricks, ClickHouse, MongoDB, you name it, right? I mean, then that becomes the true foundation of data democratization. That is, you need to have something in the middle like Kafka again and Flink to then say, okay, listen, this is the reason why. This is the reason why we want to democratize data, because we want to send one single, entity from based on the event. But then we need to do those transformations, not just in, in thinking about a single use case, but thinking about the entire, use cases of that organization for that specific entity that might be customer. Just imagine having a use case on sales. With one single use case of sales, you can democratize entities like customers that are very powerful entities. So now we get into the value of those entities. There are entities that have a higher value, and some other entities that have a lower value. So the entities with the higher value, just imagine, those are very powerful entities. Like the sales entities, those are very powerful entities. Production entities also hold a lot of value. Because if you democratize and if you improve the sales agility in a company, boom, right? I mean, it's going to just make that company very powerful. It's going to be, now getting into the this realm of digital companies.
Yeah, I fully agree on that. That's a bit of the, let's say, the shift left approach that we also try to do to make sure that your quality is guaranteed already on the producing side of things, of course, where it is possible. It's always very difficult to get the quality of data out of those SAP, Salesforce, big ERP systems because they have their own structure. But the moment that they reach their event hub, like Kafka, for example, you need to make sure that these are reusable, that you can use them for multiple purposes, not only for that single purpose because I have to send data from SAP to Salesforce or the other way around. No, because our businesses work like this. They use these entities in a manufacturing environment. The items, the material is so important. So we need to make sure that we communicate based on the business lingo, we could call it, that is needed there. Yeah. But yeah, we've been doing SAP integrations, or not only SAP, but as well Dynamics and big ERP implementations over the past couple of years. You're doing it a lot with SAP, for example. why is it so difficult to get data out of SAP? What's
It's
the catch behind it?
there are two aspects of it. One is, of course, that you know, like I said, I started with SAP in 2003.
Mhm.
Back then, in 2003, RFCs was the best way to connect, to SAP using JCO connections, the Java connections, the .NET connectors to SAP, and you had to create your own Java code to then call your JCO and connect to your R3 systems back in that day.
Okay.
And back then, SAP didn't have what today they're calling the web application system, or the web apps. But then, SAP had another product that was, ITS to create, like web pages using HTML business and those kind of things. So back then, that ITS was outside the ERP, and you had to install, these things in another server. But then in 2004, more or less around that year, SAP incorporated a web application server inside SAP. So, and with that, SAP started creating, new ways to integrate. So that pretty much SAP started, adding the XI back in that day. That was the Exchange infrastructure, I want to say, XI,
Okay.
which is, the is the precursor of PI, the process integration. So with XI, SAP now introduced the term of web services.
Mhm.
And a lot of companies embrace the web services approach, deeply. And now, you had, like, at that point, it was three different ways to integrate: RFCs, iDocs, and or RFCs, that I mean to say BAPIs. That is how SAP called, when you were calling an RFC inside SAP, you were calling a BAPI.
Okay.
And then you also have those iDocs, and
Mhm.
then now you had, these web services.
Mhm.
So web services took a little while for companies to fully understand how, those web services work. And even though, those web services were available since 2004, it is starting to catch, a lot of traction around 2008, 2010, because companies didn't know how to use these new SOAP web services that were, so new. And
Okay.
and SAP also started to create and add more functionality to these SOAP web services, and they created a transaction SOAP manager, and SAP went all in. It took them some years to get there, but then right at that time, there SAP pretty much, after some years in 2015, SAP now introduced HANA, the HANA database, 2014
Yeah.
probably. I don't remember exactly the year. And with HANA database, SAP started introducing a new way to integrate, that was the OData APIs.
Yeah.
So now, instead of going SOAP web services that are pretty much based on XML, they went with OData that are based in JSONs. Now, it has been, an evolution with those
Mhm.
SOAP APIs, with those OData APIs, where SAP went from OData APIs version 2 to version 4, and some of those APIs started to get deprecated pretty fast. So, for instance, I was in a project where we started using some APIs, but then at the end of that project, that API that I was
So
using for the go live got deprecated. I said, "What the?" And just imagine the customer; they were furious. And so we came back to say, "Hey, listen," I said, "I'm in the middle of an implementation, and you're killing me, man. I mean, what can we do?" They say, "It is what it is.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna give you visibility on, what, which APIs are gonna get duplicated, because they were developing extremely fast in a
Yeah.
way that, just the velocity of some of those APIs that they were creating were making some of the old ones duplicated."
Yeah.
So basically, with that, about going back to your question, is Integrations with SAP are very hard because there is always something new, a new way to integrate, a new way to continue with some of those prepackaged APIs. That is going to be hard to catch up. For instance, now SAP is proposing to use GraphQL with some of those integrations, and companies are always going to be in a catch-up mode. It's always trying to keep up.
Yeah, indeed. So what we faced indeed a lot of times indeed on these projects where we have to involve SAP is like, oh, we've done this before, we think, we come there and it's like, it's that version of SAP. Okay, there's a whole other way of integrating with, it's not for HANA, it's the other one. It's okay, damn, it's getting back to that.
Exactly, but then if you think about it, these, OData's version 2 versus 4, the RFCs, SOAP web services, whatever it is, we are focusing a lot on the mechanism, on that, way to, what is the best way to extract data from SAP? Whereas we should be focusing on what data are we extracting from SAP. Of course, it is important to have a compliance way, a good, technology that is going to create that connection. But I think it's more important, and that is the other, when you ask me the question, why is it so difficult to integrate with SAP, is because in SAP, you never think about data entities. You never think about creating data assets. You think about processes. And you have subject matter experts that have been working with SAP for 20 plus years, and year after year, project after project, they are always asking, what is the use case and why do you need this integration, for them to create a functional spec that is going to be focused on the description of a specific requirement and how to fulfill the integration for that specific requirement, down to say, okay, you need to use this CDS view, you need to use this OData, you need to do this, to get the data for this specific use case. So every time that you need to do an integration, you're thinking about the process first, and the data that you're going to use for that specific use case is an afterthought. It comes second. So what we are, in event-driven architectures, we put data first and the use case second, because that data can fulfill and pretty much be used and reutilized for, like we mentioned at the beginning, for multiple purposes, not just for an operational purpose, but also for an analytical purpose. So you start with the data modeling, and starting with the data modeling, when we ask our customers, prospects, hey, listen, which are the data entities that you're using in SAP? They know that they're using customers, but they don't know the boundary of customer, where a customer begins and where a customer ends. They know they're using sales order, but they don't know that boundary. They have never defined, they have never put, some thoughts on, okay, what is a sales order for my company? But they have done hundreds of, sometimes, we have customers that have thousands of integrations, thousands and thousands of integrations, but they have never, occurred to think first about the data model and how to create a consistent data entity that then can be reused for multiple.
And then with one interface, you can serve so many different use cases then afterwards. Yeah, true.
Exactly. Yeah. So that, I think, it's one of those, it's two challenges. One is the technical aspect that we as engineers love to talk technical, and we just, get very deep into, this is my way to get data.
And this is better, and this is better, and newer.
Exactly. And we love to show off, and we love to see, brag how much we have read about, these type of things, CDS views, and, I'm keeping up because it's hard to know the latest and greatest, ways to integrate with SAP. So when you get, to that point where you finally got the point of understanding the entire ecosystem of integrations with SAP, you love to brag about it.
Yeah.
So that is one thing. And the other one is that with SAP, your mindset for the last, for the entire SAP that has been out there for 50 years has always been process-centric, not data-driven, not data-centric.
All right. No. Nice insights on that. And indeed, I was about to laugh on your first entry. If we're talking about, if I know all of the integrations about SAP and bragging about it, by the time you talk about it, there's already a new way how they can do it. All right. Gustavo, we're reaching the end of our time for the podcast here. Is there anything else that you would like to share, or some insights that you say, this is one thing I still want to share about? We've been talking about SAP and integrating with SAP a lot, so maybe something about that.
Yeah, what I want to share here is that, taking a step back, and this is where sometimes the engineers, we don't see, we need to start seeing the big picture. We are living in a reality where we are immersed on a digital economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's very clear that we're embracing sales in e-commerce, in digital channels. Newer generations, they are pretty much embedded into this digital economy all the way, not just for B2C, but also they're embracing that in B2B environments as well. And that digital economy basically is being led by these digital natives. Those digital natives, are seeing the data as the first-class citizen, and that's why they have, a lot of agility to, create new innovations, embrace, artificial intelligence and those kind of things. So from a business point of view, we need to, these enterprises to have a data strategy.
To think about in data entities.
Exactly. And that's why some enterprises, they're already coming with this position of chief data officer or chief data and analytics officer that has this huge challenge on how to create governance, on how to create, a strategy around data. And that's, one of the reasons why it is important to have these, of course, the data strategy around the corporations. And it's going to, at the end of the day, we believe that that is going to add pressure to these enterprises to come up with a good, efficient way to democratize data and to create a good governance around that data, and for these companies to finally become data-driven companies.
All right, and they'll make the difference indeed in the future. All right.
Exactly.
Thank you, Gustavo, for these interesting insights onto our podcast here. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me, Wout, and a pleasure to be here with you today.
All right. See you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Talking Event Driven. We hope you enjoyed the insights and stories shared by our incredible guests as much as we did. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Stay tuned for more enlightening conversations. Until next time, keep innovating and stay event-driven.